Have you ever had a fight with your partner over something so small that it didn't even make sense? A forgotten message? A dirty dish? Being 5 minutes late? But sometimes the argument was never really about that thing. The smallest problems can become a safe place to hide bigger feelings, because what you're fighting about may not be what you're actually hurt by. Mara noticed it on a Tuesday night, standing in her kitchen with a spoon in her hand and sauce simmering on the stove. Daniel walked in late. Not dramatically late, 11 minutes. He didn't call, he didn't text, he just walked through the door like it was nothing. And something in Mara's chest went tight. "You couldn't have sent one text," she said. Daniel blinked. "It's 11 minutes, Mara." "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" She didn't have an answer. Not one she could say out loud anyway. They'd been together 3 years. Good years, mostly. He remembered her coffee order. She kept his side of the closet organized without being asked. On paper, they made sense. But lately, small things kept turning into big arguments. A dish left in the sink became a conversation about respect. A missed reply to a text became a conversation about whether he even thought about her during the day. Daniel would get defensive. Mara would get louder. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, the real conversation never actually happened. Here's what's strange, though. Mara wasn't an angry person. Her friends would have described her as calm, easygoing, the one who smoothed things over at dinner parties. So where was this coming from? That question is exactly where this story gets interesting, because the fight was never really about 11 minutes. Later that night, after the dishes were done and the apartment had gone quiet, Daniel sat across from her on the couch. "Can we talk about what just happened?" he asked. "Because I don't think this was about me being late." Mara stared at the muted TV for a second too long. "I don't know," she said. "I guess it felt like you didn't think it mattered. Like I didn't matter enough for a text." Daniel frowned. "That's not what I think at all." "I know that. Logically, I know that." And that word, logically, is the first clue. Because when our reaction to something doesn't match the size of the actual event, there's usually a second layer underneath it. Something older. Something that has nothing to do with the 11 minutes at all. Psychologists sometimes call this emotional displacement. It's when a feeling that's too big, too uncomfortable, or too hard to name gets attached to something smaller and easier to point at. It's much easier to say, "You should have texted me," than to say, "I'm scared you're pulling away from me and I don't know why." One sentence feels manageable. The other feels like standing in the middle of a storm with no shelter. So the small thing becomes the container. It holds the feeling without forcing anyone to look directly at it. But here's the part that makes this pattern so hard to catch in real time. The person doing it usually doesn't realize it either. Mara genuinely believed the fight was about respect and communication. She wasn't lying. She wasn't being dramatic on purpose. In that moment, the anger felt completely real and completely justified. That's what makes emotional displacement so tricky. It doesn't feel like avoidance. It feels like the truth. A few nights later, Mara found herself scrolling through old photos on her phone. She stopped on one from about 4 months into her relationship with Daniel. A random Tuesday, nothing special, just the two of them laughing in a car. She noticed something she hadn't thought about in a long time. Back then, when Daniel was 5 minutes late, she didn't feel this tightness in her chest. She'd just shrug and keep doing whatever she was doing. So what changed? This is where the story shifts from what is she doing to why is she doing it? And the answer isn't about Daniel at all. 6 weeks before the dish incident, Mara's father had a health scare. Nothing life-threatening in the end, but for about 18 hours, nobody knew that. Mara sat in a hospital waiting room, phone in hand, watching the clock, waiting for someone, anyone up to update her. Nobody did, not for a long time. She remembers staring at her phone, feeling this specific kind of helplessness. The kind where you're not being ignored on purpose, but it feels exactly like being ignored anyway. She never really talked about that day, not properly. Life moved on, her dad was fine, and she folded the experience into the background of her mind like it was over. But feelings don't actually check whether an event is over. They check whether it was processed, and this one wasn't. So when Daniel walked in 11 minutes late without a text, some part of her brain didn't experienced it as, my boyfriend is late. It experienced it as, I don't know what's happening and no one is telling me. The waiting room came back, not as a memory, as a feeling. That's the deeper layer this video promised to get to. It's not always about trust in the relationship. Sometimes it's about an old wound that was never given a proper place to heal, and the relationship becomes a stage where that wound quietly performs itself. This happens more than people realize. Someone gets unusually upset when their partner cancels plans last minute. And it's not really about the plans. It's about a childhood where promises were made and broken often enough that I'll be there stopped meaning anything. Someone shuts down completely during a disagreement about chores, and it's not really about the chores. It's about growing up in a house where conflict escalated fast, so silence became the only safe response. Someone gets defensive the moment their partner asks, "Can we talk about something?" And it's not really about whatever comes next. It's about a past relationship where those 5 words always led somewhere painful. The small argument is real. The dishes were actually left in the sink. The reply actually never came. But the size of the reaction almost always belongs to something bigger, something older, something the small moment simply reminded the nervous system of. This is where attachment patterns often come into the picture. For some people, especially those who experienced unpredictability early in life, whether that's inconsistent communication, emotional unavailability, or simply not knowing what to expect from the people around them, small disruptions in a relationship can feel disproportionately threatening. It's not that they think their partner is a bad person. It's that their body learned a long time ago to treat uncertainty as danger. And when that happens, the mind looks for something to hold on to, something specific, something with a clear cause and a clear person to direct it at. You didn't text me as specific. I'm afraid of being forgotten is not something most people know how to say out loud, especially not in the middle of a kitchen with sauce burning on the stove. Mara didn't put all of this together on her own. It took a conversation with her sister, almost by accident, over coffee about 2 weeks later. "You've been kind of on edge since Dad was in the hospital," her sister said, stirring her coffee. "Have you noticed that?" Mara opened her mouth to disagree, and then stopped, because she had noticed. She just hadn't connected it to Daniel, to the fights, to the 11 minutes. That's often how these realizations arrive, not through some big dramatic moment, but through someone else casually saying out loud the thing you've been circling for weeks. The next evening, Mara brought it up with Daniel again, not as an argument this time, as a conversation. "I think I owe you an explanation," she said, "about the other night, about a lot of nights actually." Daniel put his phone down. "Okay. When my dad was in the hospital, I sat there for almost a whole day, not knowing anything, and I think some part of me is still scared of that feeling, of not knowing, of waiting and not getting an answer." Daniel was quiet for a second. "And when I'm late without texting, it doesn't feel like 11 minutes, Mara said. "It feels like that waiting room." Something shifted in his expression. Not confusion this time, recognition. "I had no idea," he said. "I thought I was just annoying you. You weren't. This was never really about you." This moment matters, and here's why. Understanding where a reaction comes from doesn't erase the reaction. Mara still felt something real that night in the kitchen. Daniel being late still mattered enough to mention. But now there was context, and context changes everything about how 2 people can actually solve a problem together, instead of just managing the symptoms of it. Because here's what usually happens when couples fight about small things without knowing the real reason underneath. They get very good at solving the surface issue and very bad at solving the relationship. Daniel could start texting every single time he was 5 minutes late. That might even help for a while. But if the real fear underneath, the fear of being left without answers, of being forgotten in a moment that matters, never gets named, it doesn't disappear. It just waits for the next small thing to attach itself to. A missed call, a short reply, a distracted, "Yeah, sure," during a conversation that deserved more attention. The pattern doesn't need the same trigger twice. It just needs something that resembles the original feeling closely enough. This is why so many couples feel like they're having the same fight over and over, just with different details each time. It's not that they keep disagreeing about the same topic. It's that the same unhealed feeling keeps finding new doors to walk through. So what actually helps? Not pretending the small thing doesn't matter, because sometimes it does. Communication, consistency, and follow-through matter in any relationship. What helps is asking a slightly different question in the middle of conflict. Not just, what did my partner do, but why did this hit me the way it did? That single shift, from what happened to why it landed this hard, is often the difference between a fight that repeats itself for years and a conversation that actually resolves something. It also helps to give the other person the benefit of context instead of only the verdict of behavior. Daniel wasn't a careless partner. He was a person who didn't yet know what 11 minutes of silence could mean to someone who once sat in a waiting room with no updates and no control. Once he knew, he didn't just start texting more. He started understanding what he was actually responding to. And that's a very different kind of effort, one built on empathy instead of obligation. Mara didn't stop feeling anxious overnight either. Old patterns don't disappear because you name them once. But something did change. The next time Daniel was running late, she felt that familiar tightness begin in her chest. And this time, she recognized it for what it was before it turned into an accusation. She sent a message instead. I know this probably isn't about you being careless. I think it's the waiting room thing again. Can you just send a quick text when you can? He replied almost immediately. On my way, sorry love. I should have thought of that. No fight, no slam cabinet doors. Just two people who finally understood what they were actually dealing with. That's the real shift relationship psychology points to here. Not the idea that small arguments don't matter, but that they're often messengers for something bigger, something that deserves to be looked at directly instead of fought about indirectly. The dish in the sink was never really about the dish. The 11 minutes were never really about the 11 minutes. They were about a feeling that hadn't found its real words yet, until someone finally slowed down long enough to listen for them. If this story felt familiar, maybe it's worth asking yourself the same question Mara had to ask. The next time something small sets off a reaction that feels too big to explain, pause for a second before the anger takes over. Ask what it actually reminds you of. Sometimes the answer isn't about your partner at all. Sometimes it's about a version of you that's still waiting for someone to explain why they went quiet. If this video helped you understand a pattern in your own relationship a little better, consider subscribing. Voxa Stories shares real relationship psychology, told through stories that feel human, not clinical, because understanding why we react the way we do is often the first step toward reacting differently.